Now, there was a fascinating article in the Daily Telegraph today by former ABC Chairman Maurice Newman, which discusses the influence of Marxist ideals in our society and questions whether it has changed our fundamental democratic processes of everyday life, from the capture of major political parties across the world to the weakening of our judicial institutions, and even our children are not spared. It doesn't seem like it seems as though the tenets of Marxism, have mostly come true. So to discuss all of this now, I'm joined by Maurice. Welcome to the program, mate.
Good to be with you, Caleb.
Now, Maurice, let's sort of recap your article today. Should we be alert and alarmed about Marxism in this country?
Caleb, I think really the thing that concerns me, it's a grim outlook for our children and their children, because the degree to which Marxism has infiltrated our institutions over the past 60 years leaves virtually none of them, apart from families, immune. That if we go to, as you say, if you go to the courts, if you go to the universities, you go to schools, Marxism, and cultural Marxism in particular, has infiltrated deeply. And it's getting worse. It's there's no sense of anything rolling back. If what we've seen with the pandemic, and you were describing this earlier, the nature of some of our leaders is to push through with anti-democratic, authoritarian measures, which defy the whole sense of freedom, which we, certainly my generation, has grown up with. And while I watch or read some of the responses to that piece in the Daily Telegraph today, there are a lot of useful idiots who are saying, well, this couldn't happen here. Well, try telling that to Venezuelans, who they would have said it wouldn't happen there either. And one of the takeouts that came through to me when I wrote that piece is that if you go to China, which is sort of the utopia of Marxism today, after 70 years of Marxism and all of the trials and tribulations of the Great Leap Forward, where 40-odd million people died, the issues they had with the Tiananmen Square debacle and the Cultural Revolution, all of that. After all of that pain and hardship, 0.1% of income earners in China own more than 50% of the bottom of the Chinese population. So if they talk about egalitarianism, they say that from each according to his needs, etc. But when you actually drill down and you look at the reality, it is an egalitarian. It is an elitist methodology and an elitist ideology, which leaves people no better off, in fact, simply serfs in their own country.
Which is exactly how every communist, socialist, Marxist nation in the world has ever operated. I mean, you've only got to look at Cuba, for instance. You know, people laud Cuba as this wonderful, great communist, socialist utopia, and yet it is a country where, you know, gay people were made to work in internment camps because that's what we do in the name of equality. It's a country where they're still driving around in cars from the 1950s. Now, you know, it's created a lot of ingenuity, I suppose, but the reason they're driving around in cars from the 1950s is because they have nothing else. They don't have freedom, they don't have free access to the internet, but people go, oh, they've got free education and they've got free theatre and all sorts of things like this. You look at China, like you say, a country where vast swathes of its population, despite the country's massive wealth, are still living in poverty. They're living under the thumb of the government. It's a country, much like North Korea, where it punishes its own people. You've got Uyghurs locked up in internment camps. This is what happens in Marxist countries, but the proponents of Marxism don't seem to want to admit any of this stuff.
But the facts are there. We know that there are more billionaires in China than there are collectively combined, India, the United States, and Germany. So there are more billionaires in China than any of those three countries combined. And this is, as I say, this is the egalitarian state that we are promised if we go down the Marxist route. And it is absolutely a total fantasy. And my concern, as I was saying at the beginning, is that, and it was a Boris Yeltsin quote, which I make at the end, that we don't value things till we lose them. And that freedom is like air. You don't notice it until it's not there. And that's the thing, as I say, it's not going to affect me in my lifetime, but it will affect my children and my grandchildren. That's why I'm passionate about trying to energize people to push back on all of this.
And that's why really there is no better time to talk about it than now, because as you say, we have, over the last couple of years, had incursions upon our freedom that we never thought were possible, that we never thought we'd see in our lifetimes. And yet, as a country, we seem to have largely accepted all of this. We don't question it. We just fall into line and do what we're told. And that's a very concerning thing, I think.
We've been very obedient, very compliant.
It seems to be all we do. But you do mention in your article there's one Western institution that remains stubbornly resistant to all of this Marxism, which is the family. But that is also under threat, isn't it?
The family is under threat. Marriage, of course, is under threat. We know that single-parent families have children who are not able to reach this, or are less likely to reach the level of university education. They're unlikely to fulfill themselves in their jobs as dual-parent families do. They're more likely to go to jail. But what we're seeing with the promotion of promiscuity and essentially the destruction of the values which served us so well for so many generations, this is all now being cast aside and really being replaced by nothing other than the notion that what we have is evil, that we should be cancelling our history because the people who preceded us were villains they were racists, all sorts of terrible things. We have nothing whatever to be proud of. And we should therefore be turning our back on all of that and embracing this new orthodoxy, which is going to deliver us into some sort of promised land. But as I say, when you look at where the proponents of these people, these ideologies have taken us, those people have taken us to the Soviet Union, to Nazi Germany, to Venezuela, to the People's Republic of China. I mean, there is not one example that I can see where we have some sort of utopia where we're all living better off.
It doesn't exist. Now, very quickly, as a former chairman of the ABC, I'm interested to know what you make of the ABC's year from hell, as the SMH coined it today. You know, legal cases, all sorts of business. Where are they going, Maurice?
Well, again, I mean, they are captured by an ideology, and everything they do is biased in favour of promoting that ideology. It's a propaganda machine for the Green Left. And they don't bother to do fact-checking. They don't bother. This is not about journalism anymore. It's about advocacy. And as a consequence of that, we've seen so many programs, time after time after time. Their legal department has expanded beyond any sense of, compared to people like, say, Sky or News Corporation or any private sector organisation in the media, the ABC's legal department is just enormous. And they're pushing back and saying the government has no right to interfere in what they do. Well, the government is actually representing the people who are putting $1.1 billion on the line every year, and they're getting in return a product which is certainly substandard.
And they want even more money, would you believe it? Maurice Newman, thank you very much for joining me on the show tonight.
My pleasure, Caleb.